welcome once again to David English and all things Chinese. It's a special day today, they tell me, in China. It's the 104th anniversary of the Chinese Communist Party. My goodness me, that's been going some time. And if you remember, and apparently now, David, there's over 100 million worldwide membership, then you've got something to celebrate. But it's not all sweetness and light, is it?
No, they're kind of they're unraveling from the inside, the Chinese. I mean, there's lots of, whether it's population collapse, people resigning from the party, or Xi Jinping's apparently about to lose power. So there's lots of things going on. The biggest thing that the West don't know about is a movement called Tuidang, which is a self-initiated movement within China of people to renounce their membership from the Chinese Communist Party and all of its affiliated organizations. Because when you're a young kid, 6 or 7, you have to pledge your life to the blood red flag in China, and then they're a bit like the Masons in the West. If you want to get ahead in business, you've got to join fully the Communist Party and do its deeds and all the rest of it. And since the mid 2000s, there's been this movement called Tuidang to renounce the Chinese Communist Party and all of its affiliated organizations. And that's got to be, I mean, I'll have to check the exact figures, but there's roughly 450 million people done this. So the if you like, the spiritual power base of the Chinese Communist Party is nearly completely exhausted. I think when it gets to about 500 million, it'll probably collapse internally in China, because they're just hated. They're hanging on with. All right, I'll give you an example. When they complained that they were being stunted and they were being held back developmentally by the Chinese government, the Chinese allowed them to have Western goods. So they've been buying the Chinese people off with Western technological advancements. It's like a paper cutout version of an advanced society. It's very, very backward in the way that it morally holds the people, but they're paying them off with technology, essentially, to say, well, your quality of life is better. But they're actually deeply hated by large portions of the population. If you go back to Mao's time, where people didn't even dare think a negative thought about the Chinese government because they were afraid somebody would feel the thought and report them. Now they openly sit round at the dinner tables and denigrate the Chinese government. So they're pretty much done. It's not a question of if, it's just a question of when, right? And then how many people get taken down with it. And I think a lot of that, the when depends on the West, because it's going to coincide with the West being ready to tackle that. But I think either way, it's like China's goose is, or the CCP's goose is cooked. China will live on. China's 5,000 years old. It's almost unbroken line of civilization, really, until the Communist Party. And they will regain what they had before. They are the wise man of the East, right? As much as England was the wise man of the West, China will be the wise man of the East. And indeed, it was the spiritual council for the world, essentially. We used to send our courtiers and we used to communicate with the Chinese emperors all of the time to learn and to understand. And a lot of the things that filtered through the West actually did come out of positive understandings of things within China. So China has to regain this position. And when it does, it will probably operate again as like the sage old wisdom that helps to benefit the rest of the world. So they are, as much as I'm kind of taking a zoom out of a 10 or 20 year approach and saying, look, this will happen within the next decade or two. We do have to get through the next 5 or 6 years, which will probably be the last dying breaths of the dragon. And they'll probably be quite severe. So I do imagine there will be some sort of war, probably Taiwan. I think they'll probably encourage the Middle East to take the brakes off domestic terrorism within Western nations. And I can't see us getting through the next 5 or 6 years without certain degrees of of conflict.
Well, it's not a very cheerful picture. I know it's almost impossible to get out of the CCP. You know, you don't sort of say, "Oh, well, I've had my 10 years, I've got my job, I'll leave now." I mean, there's some terrible stories what happened to people that are dissenters.
There was a guy called Enver Tohti. Enver Tohti was a doctor for the CCP. He was one of the first people to blow the whistle on the organ harvesting. And the reason he blew the whistle because he was one of the first doctors to do it. And he was telling me a story of when his mother joined the CCP. And it was something like the night of joining the CCP, she came home with a handgun for personal protection. And she kept that handgun and she lived by that handgun because it's like the mafia. Once you're in, it's like a blood debt. And it has to be paid at some point, but you are also permanently walking or you're permanently under the sword of Damocles, right? Like it's all the time. Is it going to drop on you? Is it going to drop on you? And that's what being in the CCP, in those inner ranks, those inner workings of the CCP is like. Like it's not nice. And the way they've twisted China is just not like, it's like hell on earth. We think things are bad here and things have accelerated here in the last 5 or 6 years. And I think that's because of the Chinese government. But it's worse there. Like if somebody gets knocked over in China, they'll reverse over the body backwards and forwards till they're dead because it's cheaper to pay compensation for killing somebody than it is to continually pay for the medical bills. And you're talking anything from a toddler to a geriatric. It doesn't matter. They'll kill them. So life has become so worthless in China. You know, rape of young women by CCP officials is just ridiculously common. And there's nothing you can do. Like people just turn a blind eye to it. There was even a guy that was an artist about a decade or so ago. He was eating the flesh of dead babies in an art exhibition. Like this is how far China has degenerated. And I genuinely think, look, if the 2020 election had gone the other way and it was decertified like Trump wanted, all the conversations we're having now about infiltration into the West from Islamic countries, we'd be having the same conversations, but it would be about the CCP. And it's my personal opinion that the CCP is just front-loaded the West with a load of problems as cannon fodder. It's literally just like, well, we're just going to shove all of your problems because they're using the Middle East as just a pawn. They're using them as useful idiots. They're just going to shove them in front of the West, let the West fight it out amongst them and exhaust themselves. And then it's easier for China to get leverage after that.
I mean, they're infiltrating everywhere, especially the States, especially Africa. And they're doing it by all sorts of manner of means. I was watching a program the other day about a railway line in Nigeria. It was built for under £2 billion. And it's a long line. I mean, it would cost 100 times more than that. They can do it.
What's cheap steel? It's inferior. So it'll bend, it'll buckle, it'll break, it'll have all sorts of problems. So
yeah.
It's not pound for pound, you know.
What's in it for China? It's obviously not the money.
It's power. Their constitution says that. So for the ordinary Chinese, it's like, well, this is our birthright. It is our destiny to completely rule the world. It says so in the Chinese Communist Party constitution, right? But for the Chinese government themselves, it is the ability to escape the noose. Look, the atrocities that they have committed in their own country are so severe that, you know, if we did that, we hung the Nazis for a fraction of what the Chinese have done, a fraction, right? When it all comes to light and the 100 million plus that have died in China at the hands of the Chinese Communist Party fully comes to light and all of the horrific, barbaric things they've done, they will hang. So it's a matter of self-preservation. It's a race against the clock. Look, it's anti-universal. It's an anti-universal system. It's an anti-universal doctrine. It's an anti-humanity doctrine. Like, it is so devilish. It's despised by everything, right? It is literally permanently fighting for its survival. And it knows that it has to get control of the world before the West does. Because if the West fully takes back control, which they've lost since, and I'm sorry, the world was better when the British ran it. Full stop. It was much better when the British were at it. America really bad faith negotiated the British out of that system, out of that arrangement, and has essentially made the world worse in the last 80 years. They've done nothing with the system that we set up. They've squandered it, right? They've destabilized the world. They've promoted communism through their films and everything else. You know, hopefully Trump's going to turn that around. But if the Americans really want this mantle and this label of the world police, they've got to start doing the right thing, because this wouldn't have happened under the watch of the old British Empire. We just wouldn't have allowed it, because there were certain things where we just went, well, it's not Christian, it's anti-humanity, it's an affront against God, so we would just wipe it out. So China has to get this control, or it's in trouble. It's in big, big trouble, because the Anglosphere, and it will come from the Anglos, we won't tolerate it. And we'll hold our leaders to ransom. We will not tolerate this. Yes, they're not making a great deal of money out of these things, but what they are getting is power. And the left and communism, and Marx, all they wanted was power. They want the power to recreate the world in their image, in the way that they see fit. And that's what China wants to do. You talk about its influence. There's an organization of the Chinese government called the United Front Organization, right? It is essentially a soft power influence organization. They've got 40,000 people in the United Kingdom working for them. 40,000 influencing our politicians, our police, our community leaders. That's more staffers than we have attached to our government. It's insane. So they have a network like that. They're outfoxing us. They can outnumber us on every metric. And that's not talking about the spy network that they have with the students. All students are required to report back to their community head. They call them the travel agent, right? And they have to go and report back to their travel agent and tell them what's going on. I've met these travel agents, okay? I've sat in a room with them. I've had them observing me before, right? This is the way it's run. Every student is a spy. And that's just the students. That's not the nationals who come over here. They have their passports taken off them, so they can't run away. And they then have to do the bidding of the Chinese government in this country, or their families back home get targeted. And this is all extra to the 40,000 people who work for the United Front. Things like BLM in America and in the UK was funded by the United Front. A lot of your terrorist organizations, if the money isn't coming from George Soros and his open project, which he tends to fund the media side, the grassroots, boots on the ground, militant, organized left is coming from the United Front. Your trade unions in England are all associated with Beijing. Everything that is left is now running to Beijing, because when the Soviet Union fell and we thought the Cold War ended, the Chinese inherited that entire Soviet system, and for them, the Cold War has not ended.
Well, I suppose you're saying that it's the left that they want in power, or the extreme left.
They'll use both sides to get the middle. So this is another thing, and this is like, so when we look at the left, we look at socialism. Socialism is this morally liberal free-for-all, right? But when communists get into power, they're just as locked down and conservative in what the ordinary man is allowed to do as any Islamic country. Islamism and communism are the same thing, okay? They behave in exactly the same way. It's an externally forced ideology where nobody's watching, because it hasn't come from cultivated inner virtues like the West promote. When nobody's watching, they'll do whatever they like, right? It's an externally enforced morality. So it's not the left as such. They will use the left in order to gain the complete totality of power. And then the people in power can behave however they want. And we tend to view, I think it's a very shallow understanding of Westerners, we tend to view, well, if something is morally strict, then it has to be from the right of politics. And if something is morally loose, it has to be from the left. But that arc of the left and right, that morally loose bit is only the preparatory stage in order to destabilize society so that you can then bring in the totalitarian, externally forced conservative control. Now, there's another element of difference between the right and the left. When the right promotes conservative values, it's for your betterment. It's for your spiritual development and your spiritual protection. It's coming from a point of view, well, this is dangerous for you, and this will damage you as an individual. For them, it's coming from the point of view of, well, this is dangerous for me, and this will make my order harder to control. So it's not coming from the same basis. There is no care, there's no compassion for the individual. It comes about just trying to stabilize society so they can retain power. They're not the same things. The starting points are completely different, despite the fact that, and you get this with Iran. Countries like Iran have, it's more morally strict than the West, so it must be better. And you get a lot of right-wing commentators saying things like this. And I said, well, no, it's enforced. And if they step out of it, they're hung from a crane. So no, it's not. And they haven't had to go through the destabilizing process of renting the power that lies within the people to have their countries governed in the way that is best for them from their hands, which is what the whole point of that morally liberal destabilizing part of the left is. It is to destroy the power structures that lies in the hands of the population, to then enforce the power structure in the hands of the few.
Well, it seems to me that they've clearly got the WHO, World Health Organization, in the palm of their hand, covering up COVID being an illustration of that. Now, is that the same as the United Nations? Are the United Nations in the hands of the Chinese?
I'll tell you a story, Rodney. So it's my own personal dealings with the UN back in the day and the Chinese government. We tried to have a big UN conference on organ harvesting in China, right? We spent ages contacting MEPs from all around Europe and politicians, and we had arranged this conference to be held in a particular room. At the last minute, so nobody could find out, because it was at the very last minute, the Chinese government had the room changed so that nobody could attend. So the speakers gave their speech to about 4 people, because there's only 4 people that figured out where it was, right? So that was about 2009. That's when I realized then that Chinese had their hooks well into the UN. And that was then, and they pretty much run it now. So all these institutions will end up going.
There are other organizations, as an example, LGBT plus, etc., that in their own way are trying to take over the world, in fact, through the United Nations even. How does that go on in China? How strict are they? Or do they welcome LGBT?
No, not at all. Not at all. Again, that's just the destabilization. China will promote that to the West, to destabilize the West. Everybody knows in warfare, and this is ancient knowledge. You can find this in ancient Greek writings, ancient Chinese writings. The more morally corrupt your population is, the easier it is to take over. So they'll promote that in the West, but in their own people, it's not allowed. It's really frowned upon, despite the fact that the cadres will be having nights with 2 and 3 ladies at a time and all the rest of it. But for the ordinary people, you have to be moral and virtuous. And again, it's this duplicity. The reason the West has those morals and virtues is because they do not want you to do anything that will hinder your ability to return to heaven. The reason the communists do it is because it promotes social unrest and makes their order more difficult to maintain. The difference is the starting point cannot be further apart. So they don't like this sort of thing in China. And you'll find the Iranians will be against it too, right? But they'll promote it abroad. And they're happy to side with it while society is collapsing. And then when the society is collapsed to a certain point, they'll put them all against a wall. They'll throw them off buildings. So they're just a very, very morally duplicitous people. Well, regime.
How do they treat the women?
Where in China?
Yeah.
Well, the fact that if you have until recently, if you had a girl, they would drown it, wouldn't they? So women are second-class citizens in China. This thing of treating women as precious is a Western thing. It's a Western thing. You don't find it in the Old Testament. You don't find it in Judaism. You don't find it in Islam. It's not as bad in China, but this thing of treating them like a queen. What was it Tacitus said about the Germanics, that they regard their women like semi-spiritual beings with gifts of prophecy and wisdom, so they will never refuse their counsel. Right? This is a Western approach, that you value your women as highly precious. The ancient Chinese did. I'll give them that. The ancient Chinese were quite good. But the Chinese government doesn't really want to have that system. They don't want to have women like that. They don't even want to have distinctions between men and women, because everybody should just be a worker. Everyone should just work. But then once you start valuing women, society changes. Your arts go up. Okay. A lot of the fine craft work is done by the women. Your men, it's like God inspires the soul, women inspire the heart. Your men take on a different role. The inspirational quality that women can give men, like, will drive them to battle ferocious. I mean, look at Joan of Arc, right? So there is something within the quality of women that the West understood, that if you allow the woman to be fully in her element, she's a semi-divine being. They can create life, right? They have enormous creative powers, and you have to cherish and protect them. And it was this ability to cherish and protect women and children that allowed the West to flourish.
We're on a different planet in many ways in all this, David. I'll give you an example. Texas has suffered this horrible flooding, a lot of children killed in that as well. And of course, the fashion at the moment is to get a very fast car or a heavy car and run into crowds. Now, that makes headlines all over the world in the West. It's almost common in China. This very day, there's been 2 announcements. One at a sports arena. A Chinese man called Fan has run into and killed 34, seriously damaged many other people. We never hear about it in the West, but that's what's happened. And he did it, apparently, because he went through a divorce with his wife. She got everything, he got nothing, and it was a way of taking his vengeance. Floods. Northwest China has horrendous floods in the plum season every year. This year's been particularly bad. The Chinese authorities, perhaps 6 people have died. That's false. It's a darn sight more than that. It's covered up again. Now, are we not interested in the West, in what happens in China?
Well, I think, 10, 15 years ago, if you remember when they had that earthquake where all the schools collapsed, these things, there's such an embarrassment for the Chinese government, because it's a corrupt regime. So the whole society, like, what's that old phrase? The emperor is the wind and the people are the corn. Whichever way the wind blows, the corn bends, right? So the government is corrupt, therefore the people are. So when these things come out, it's an embarrassment. So they try and cover it up because they need to have the international bluster. They need to be seen as being great, glorious, and correct, no matter what happens. And they can't be embarrassed at any point. So they will lie and they will cover up on everything.
Yeah, I mean, but they're very good at trade wars, David, aren't they? This is their warfare. I mean, this week again, Vietnam decided to do a deal with Trump or vice versa. And the Chinese don't like it. And they say, we're not having that. We'll get big tariffs on you. What a cheek.
Well, the Chinese are trying to pull Vietnam into the BRICS nation as well. So that would then give them pretty much half the world's population in this BRICS nation pact that they've got going on. And it is going to make things tougher for Trump. Like, if you ask me, and I've said this before, I genuinely think that Trump's absolute destiny is to destroy communism. And I think he'll do it relatively peacefully as well. But it would have been easier if he'd done it in 2020. And it's going to be harder now, which is why I'm not bleak about the future, but I'm realistic. There's no way this 250-year-old power project is just going to say, oh well, you've got a handful of right wing leaders in the West. I'll just be off now, thanks. It's not going to go quietly. We have to be prepared that it's going to go very, very difficultly, and we have to be ready, like mentally ready for that, right? But Trump will do everything he can to make it as peaceful as is humanly possible. But that doesn't mean the other side is going to. It doesn't mean they're going to play ball and go, well, Trump doesn't like people being killed, so we'll just agree. They're not going to do that, right? There is going to be difficulty, and we just have to accept it. But we have to tackle China. Like everything runs back to China. You get rid of China, the Middle East calms down. Terrorism was the influence of the Chinese government on the Middle East. They were Maoists. So it's Islamo-communism. That's what terrorism is. You get rid of that, the Middle East will die down, right? But then you can't just go in and tackle China when Iran is still there. And it's got nothing to do with the Iranian people. It's the Iranian regime. You need to destabilize the Iranian regime because the money that's being paid to Iran to keep Iran quiet is being funded out to all of its proxies. So you've got to take care of Hezbollah. You've got to take care of Hamas. You've got to do all of this stuff because the people in the Middle East shouldn't be living like this either. They shouldn't. They should be self-determined. That doesn't mean they want democracy. Like every nation's different. Africans don't like democracy. They want a chieftain. They want to have one big man that they can stand behind and be proud about. The Middle Easterners don't want democracy. They want a sheikh or a sultan or a vizier. They don't want what we have. Iran wants a shah. They want a king because that's what they've always done. I'm English. Democracy was never meant to have the power in England that it has now. It was meant to be one system of a three-branched system with the king holding the executive reign. And Churchill blew it out of the water, and it's never come back since. So, we don't want, Americans say that they don't want a king, but the office of the President of the United States is a monarch. They just change their monarch every 4 or 8 years, depending on if they like them or not. But in fact, the president holds far more power than the English monarch does. But it's set up almost identically to England. It is an English system. So like every people are different because the structure in the brain is different. Like you got to look into like what Carl Jung talked about when he was talking about the archetypes within dreams. Different races of people have different archetypes for the different meanings within dreams. We're not the same in here. We're different. We have a different impulse. So you can't export Western democracy to everybody. So you have to let the people self-determine, but you can't tackle China until you isolate China from all of its current allies. And you've got to do that as diplomatically as possible with as little. I mean, this strike on the nuclear facility in Iran is a good indicator. Trump told them he was going to do it so nobody would die because he doesn't want them to die. He wants them to bend to his will whilst he sorts the world out till he can get to a point where he can tackle China because he knows China is the rot.
David, utterly fascinating. We thank you once again, and we will see you very shortly.
Thank you very much, Rodney. Thank you.